If you're going to be transporting your brushes from home to wherever you plan on painting, and you don't want them looking like a puffed up Pomeranian when you arrive, you're going to need a better brush case. Now, most brush cases look something like this. A much better design is something along these lines. However, I'm not so sure that I like the idea of the plastic lid pressing against the brushes into the foam. I kind of feel like it's going to be detrimental to the long-term life of your brushes. I'm Jason Isaac, the Tyrant Director, and today we're going to use this case as inspiration with a cost under the $25 price tag Amazon charges for it and build a better brush case. Alright, so let's take a look at the materials and tools we're going to need for building our case. To start with here, what I have is a plastic box. It's a long pencil box that I bought from Staples. This was about $5 after taxes here in BC. And so it's quite a bit longer than we need. If I take a look at my brushes here, this selection of brushes, I think they average, or like the longest one is somewhere around 7.5 inches to 8 inches. So I was looking for something that was a little longer than 8 inches. This one happens to come in at 13.5 inches long. So considerably longer than we need, but I'd rather it longer than too short. I also look for something maybe a little less plasticky, but wooden boxes in a similar size just weren't readily available. So I did a little bit of looking, but couldn't find much. But this is still good. So it's got a bit of depth for us. So we're going to be able to do more than just store brushes in here. And I'm going to get to that as we build. All right, so that's our first piece. But I'm going to put that aside for now. We'll just have Master Yoda keep an eye on that. The next thing here is I've got some foam core. Because this has a fair bit of depth in it, we're going to need to pad it a little bit. And so my first thought was I can use some foam core to provide a bit of a stability, and it'll be the base upon which we'll attach our foam as we go through. If you're using something that's much shallower than this, then you may or may not need to use the foam core. If you want to follow along exactly this box, then you're going to want some foam core. So this is just some black foam core with black paper. I picked this up at Michael's, which, you know, if you shop at Michael's at all, it always sucks because they're expensive. But there's always a 40% off coupon. So I think I paid $8 for 3 big sheets of this. So even if we said that we use the whole sheet, it's like $3 worth of foam core, and that's excessive. Like realistically, I used less than half of a sheet here. So these, if we count that as $3, we're at $8 so far. And then for the foam, this is some foam weather stripping that you can buy at Home Depot or any hardware store. This isn't what I wanted. This is what was available at the Home Depot when I went there. It's a little looser foam than I would like. I want a denser foam. This is $6 for a roll, which will do more than enough. So if we assume that you needed a whole roll, we're at 8 and 6 is $14. Let's call it $15 after taxes, and throw a couple bucks in there for your gas to get there. So that's basically what we could use. Now, I'm not going to use this. I happen to have the denser foam that I want, and actually this already has a pressure sensitive adhesive on the back of it. This is something that I obtained from Windrow's Armory, which is a site that does medieval reenactment gear, and this is something that you would use to line your helmet with if you're doing combat in things like the SCA or whatnot. So I had this kicking around because I do combat in the SCA, or have done combat in the SCA. I'm kind of on a break right now. But in any case, I've got a sheet of this. So this sheet probably cost me about $10 US. So if you're going with something like this with the pressure sensitive adhesive, it's a little bit more. A cheaper alternative would be something like, I'm just going to pull this into frame here. This is just your regular EVA floor mat. I picked this up at the dollar store for a couple of bucks. And so this would work just as well as this stuff. It's still got that same density. It's a higher density than what we've got here. And you can get thicker ones, definitely. So if we assume that there's $3 to $6 worth of foam, depending on what exactly you're going to use for your solution. So I'm just going to put this aside, and we'll talk a little bit about the tools that we're going to be needing. Now, obviously, we need something straight to cut with, or straight to measure with, but to cut, I'm going to be just using a regular multi-blade. Something like this is great because as you cut the foam core, the blades actually dull pretty quick. If you've got a quick little knife sharpener, not the type that you'd necessarily want to use for a high-end pocket knife, but just one of those kind of quick slide through, it'll actually be really good. I have one, I just couldn't find it. So the nice thing with this is I can just snap the blade off as I go through. This was a fresh blade before I did these initial cuts, which I didn't think necessarily you guys need to see me measuring out and cutting those. I'll talk about the measurements in a moment. But yeah, so I can just snap it off. So as I go, and I've got extra blades here if need be. The next thing, hot glue. Hot glue is a hobbyist's best friend when you're doing a project like this because it dries quickly. I'm only really going to be using it for attaching these pieces into the box. I could also use, I've got some carpet tape here. This is just something I had kicking around and I use for various projects, but it's a really strong double-sided tape. And it's a nice option if you don't want to have the glue gun factor going or don't have a glue gun. Double-sided tape can work well for this as well. You could also use something like PVA glue, or I've got some Elmer's wood glue here as well. All of those would be solid options for getting this attached in here. And then for attaching this to the foam core or to the box, you'd probably want to use either the hot glue or look at something like a contact cement if you're working with the EVA foam that doesn't have the pressure sensitive adhesive on the back. So this is just a super nice convenient thing for what I'm doing here. I'll probably throw a bead of hot glue on just to be sure though. All right, so how we're going to tackle this is we're actually going to make a bit of a sandwich. So I've measured the inside of this, and so the inside here is about 12.5 centimeters wide, and that's what I cut these to. And then the top and bottom, so the bottom here is about 31 millimeters or 3.1 centimeters deep, and the top is 28 mil or 2.8 centimeters deep. And what we want is we want to have the bottom stack that the brushes are going to go on to be right up to that 3.1 centimeter height, and we're going to want the top here to be right at that 2.8 centimeter depth. So that way what happens when you close the box, the brushes are held in place without necessarily putting extra pressure on them. And the other thing that we're going to do here is because we've got this extra depth, and I've got, you're probably looking at this like that's a lot for just suspending the brushes. But I figure we've got the opportunity here when we drop this in on top of here, we can also put a little cutout for our brush cleaner. So this is just, the Master's brush cleaner. Frankly, this little $4 thing probably has saved me, I don't know, $50 worth of brushes by just cleaning my brush at the end, and hey, my brush isn't a gunky mess. So what we're going to do, we've got those. The tools we're going to need is something to get a good straight line. For that, I recommend something like a square. Frankly, I'm really bad at cutting straight lines. I mean, even with the square, I still got this jaggedy ass shit going on. In any case, square is good, and it will help you get a nice clean line when you're using your knife. To measure the depth, what I did is I've got a set of cheap calipers here, which is good enough, and then just use the depth gauge while having my ruler braced across the top of the entry here. So I just basically put that there, got my measurement, and then adjusted as necessary. So that is how I got those measurements, and that's where we're going to start, is by trimming this down to fit inside. Now these are both long and probably a little bit deeper than we need. So I'm going to start by just trimming off one bit of the end of this using my knife after I measure how much I need. So realistically, my brushes again are 8 inches long, but I'm going to put a liner along the whole bottom for the box. So we need something about probably 32.5 centimeters by the time we account for the little bit of a roll in there, because of course it's scooped, it's not just flat. So if I cut this probably just a little bit less than, if we cut it at 32.5, it'll probably be fine. So just line this up here, 32.5, and because we're working with black foam core, got a gold Sharpie to mark it. Simple, 32.5. And then we get our handy dandy square. I find it best for stuff like this to make multiple cuts, and then you're not worrying about going through. I also have obviously a cutting mat down here, which is protecting my tabletop from being mangled. So I'll just, I'm going to put it this way in, and it's just a bit wide actually. So remember how I talked about the fact that I'm not always great getting a straight edge with my knife here. So I'm just going to trim this, and part of it's probably because I cut it at a bit of an angle. So we're just going to trim this off a touch. Get that out of there. All right, so that's just about it. We probably want to nick just a touch off the end. And that's the lovely thing with this is, and definitely anytime you're working this, and if you're taking a look at this saying, hey, I really like that idea, Jason, but I'm using a different size box, always make sure your measurements are a little bit longer than you think you need, a little bit wider, because it's easier to trim off. There we go. Than it is to add back on. Now it's still rolling a little bit. It's not quite sitting flush in there. So I think I'm just going to nick a little bit more off of the side. Just trim it down a little bit more. And make sure that it's flush on the bottom. That'll make everything just that little bit easier. There we go. That's cleaned up. Pop that in there. It's right on the bottom. Excellent. So I'm just going to make sure my hot glue gun is plugged in here so I can toss that in. The next thing I need to do is I need to figure out exactly how deep this is going to wind up being. So as I said, my bottom is 31 millimeters, my top is 28. So it might be a good idea for me to leave that there so I can see that until I get my next few layers sorted out. So let's grab a piece of this, my foam here, and obviously we're going to need to trim that because it's sitting quite a bit proud of that foam core. So I need 31 millimeters. So if I take 2, assuming that what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a base layer where I can create a little hole for my brush cleaner, and then I'll put another layer, and that'll actually be just a strip where the brushes are going to sit in, and we can see how deep that is. Now, if you don't have the calipers, you can use something like a ruler here, and I can measure that to be just about bang on 31 mils. But if I grab my calipers, my digital calipers here, and see what that comes up with, 31.5 mil. That is brilliant. So assuming that there's a little bit of extra wiggle room, and by the time I compress things in, that's perfect. It's actually better than I anticipated. I actually, not believing that this would line up exactly as I planned, I have some plastic cards set aside just in case I needed to put a little bit of a shim in. It does beg the question though, I need 28 mils on the top. What does that look like? So how is 2 of those? 2 of those is 26. 25 mil. So it's not quite enough. So what I'll probably do is use a couple layers of foam core and 1 piece of that to give me the top band. All right, that's awesome. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this and I'm just going to trim down this piece of foam to match in size to my foam core. Where's my felt? Here's my Sharpie. Let's just... And part of my foam issue here is when I cut it, I'm not necessarily cutting straight down, which I should be. I'm cutting at an angle. When I did the initial cuts, I cut at an angle, which caused the problem. One more and I think we'll be through. There we go. So that's nice and clean. And now it's okay that this is a bit wider because obviously this box flares out a bit. And so that's all right. And I'm not concerned about the fact that we're not coming right to the end. We can choose to center it a bit if we want. We got a couple options. If I really wanted to, I could put that in there or something like that to close it off. But frankly, I don't think that's necessary for this. All right. So it looks like the hot glue gun is drooping some glue out its nose. So let's go ahead and put some glue on here. So what I'm doing is I'm just making a big X across the middle and then doing the top and bottom. Wipe the glue off there. I'm going to wind up with some glue strings and drop this in and push into place. The lovely thing about the foam is that it's an insulator, so we don't wind up with any hot spots as we compress the glue in there. But now that should be relatively stable, which is perfect. All right. So our next piece is we're going to want to take this and apply it in here. Now, I'm, once again, really lucky because I've got this pressure-sensitive adhesive. So all I really need to do is take this off here. He says, as if it's an easy thing to do. If you've ever worked with these pressure-sensitive adhesive bits, double-sided tape and the like, getting the second backing off is usually some sort of sorcery is required. I'm not ideal at it, and I try to keep my nails trimmed, which makes it worse. I will get this off. There we go. I've got the pressure sensitive adhesive off, and now I'm going to, for my purposes, I'm going to drop it right to the bottom, and I'd rather just have a gap at the top. All right, so there we go. Got our pressure sensitive adhesive attached on there, and now looking at that, I do have some concerns that this is going to pop up over the top of that. So I'm just going to trim some of this off of here because I'm going to be just creating some bands of foam there. So let's just get that cut down. There we go. And this side I didn't think was quite straight enough, but let's just see where we're at. Okay. So with that in there, we can see it sits just proud of the top there. And I'm okay with that, actually. Thinking about it, I like the idea of it being just that little bit above. I can deal with it with the top. And the key thing here is because this has a relatively loose locking mechanism, if we put too much pressure on the top and bottom, it won't seal properly, and that'll be an issue. It is, of course, the challenge of dealing with a box like this, but that's all right. So what we need now, and actually if I'd have been thinking I would have done this first, is I need to put a hole in the middle in here for my soap. How am I going to do that? Well, first thing I do is I'm going to trace it out on the foam here. Now I could put this just about anywhere, but I'm just deciding to put it right kind of smack dab in the middle. I don't have anything else I'm intending on putting into this particular device, so it's just going to be that. But this would have been so much easier if I'd have done it before I put it in here. I mean, realistically, at this point, if I wanted to, and especially since I'm making a video of this, I could just remove the whole shooting match. But instead, I'm going to let you watch me as I flub this up a little bit as a learning experience. Remember to do all the steps in order. But in any case, there we go. Now I could dig that out a little bit more and go into the foam core to get that right out. But I don't think I actually want to do that. I think that is fine. So I've got a spot for that. And now what I need is a way to put my brushes in a safe manner. Clearly that's not going to work. So, but what I can do, and what I will do here, is we'll just pull these brushes out and take that piece that I have here. Let's get rid of some of this garbage for a moment. None of the blade bits are going to go over there. And yeah, if you're a mom and you're watching this, yes, I just threw that stuff to the side on the floor. I unfortunately don't have a production crew to come and clean up, so I've just got to clean that stuff up myself afterwards. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut. Now that's making an assumption that any of these are straight, which is a big assumption at this point because they're all pre-cut. So instead, what we will do is we will measure from one end, and let's say we want about, I think, a 2 centimeter band that we're going to use to support our brushes in 2 spots. So we'll cut two 2 centimeter bands. So mark it 2 and we'll mark it 4. Just that way it's already marked. So then we do 2 and 4. And then what we'll do is we'll that, mark that, And the lovely thing is that this particular ruler, because it's got the cork on the back, it actually grips onto the foam core pretty well. So I can set it where I want. I'm just going to try to aim for right in the middle of my line. As you get into hobbying and doing this sort of thing, you'll develop patterns, whether that's to cut the inside of the line, the outside of the line, or the middle of the line. I tend to go for, when I'm using foam, the middle of the line. Especially when I'm using a Sharpie. If I'm using something finer, then I'll go usually to the outside. But again, it's about the preference you make over time. So there's one, and then our second one towards the middle. You can see, and you might be able to hear that the blade is not making as nice a cut because the EVA foam is brutal on it. So if you're a cosplayer at all, you know just how brutal that is. And it's a trick I learned, I think Punished Props is where I learned it, that yeah, just using one of those quick knife sharpeners prolongs the life of your blade. All right, so what we've got now is we've got our two bands, and basically I'm just going to grab a couple of brushes here for sample. So that's what we're going to have. And I want my shorter one, so I'm going to move them closer together because I don't want, the goal here is to preserve the bristles, right? So I'm going to put those there, and I can see, yeah, that will do the job I want nicely. I can even separate them just a little bit more. So what I'm going to do then is we're going to pull off the pressure sensitive adhesive, get those stuck in there. There's the first one. And then we'll do the second one here. Much less fighting than when I was doing that big sheet, of course. And right about there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make a couple of slits. Now I'm thinking that a brush needs a little bit of space. And so I'm not going to be able to transport the whole wad of brushes. I'm going to be able to transport, let's do 10 brushes. So every centimeter or so we'll put a cut. So this is 12 centimeters wide. So if we put a cut at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. And then we'll do the same thing over here. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my square that I threw to the ground a moment ago and see if I can't get these to be generally in the same spot. So that your brushes can... Now I'm not cutting a wedge in here. I'm just going to cut a line to give the brushes something to recess into. Again, the goal here is to provide protection for your brushes while you're transporting them. And I mean, I don't know, if you're using, you know, your standard hobby grade, say let's call your GW brushes, you're paying $8 a pop for them. You don't want them getting wrecked. If you're like me and have done some other hobbying or other painting where you're using nice brushes. So like I've got a Series 7 Winsor Newton Sable brush that I paid $50 for. Yeah, $50 for a single brush. And I don't have anything to transport it like this. I will now. But I didn't know better then. I just knew it was a good brush. So I bought it. Which is not always the right way. The reality is, I'm going to talk about brushes and the gear that you need for hobbying in an upcoming video. So if that's something you're interested in and you haven't already, definitely hit that subscribe button. And let's just do this from the other side then for these last two. Hit the subscribe button, get the notifications, and what you're going to wind up with then is seeing what I think are the top 5 hobby tools you need, and then we'll talk a little bit also about care for them. So now that we've got those lines in there, we can kind of roll our brushes in. Maybe they need to be a little bit wider up front here. So we can cut a bit of a wedge out here instead. And that will give our brushes a little bit more space to breathe. All right, so now that we've got those grooves cut in, the brushes will fit in there a little bit better, depending on the size of the brush. And you can customize these as you want. I've got some bigger brushes that I'm working with right here. If I take one of my smaller brushes, fits in there nicely. And the important thing here is that these ends are going to be suspended up, right? So whether or not you put the divots in or not is up to you. I think it's going to be helpful in my particular case. Now the next piece is we're going to have that go there, but then we're also going to need a bit of a line. So much like we had here where we've got these lines, we're going to want to put an additional line in. Now I'm just going to pull my brushes out because I don't want them getting mangled, as I just do a quick sanity check to see if I do that. So 2 layers of the foam will close tightly, which is perfect. So what we're going to do is just pop that off. Pop these out. This one will go down first because it's the full length. Now I could not put a full length in here, but by putting the full length, I do have the option if I want to put something else in here like I have with this. I could just put a couple of bands, and that might be a better option, but I think I'm going to go with the full padding up there. So the first thing I do is I'm just going to trim down the side because it's just that little bit wide, partly because my cut isn't straight and partly because this was measured to the outside, and as we get in it gets narrower, and part of that comes from just the mold process. If you're not aware or haven't dealt with those sorts of molds, you think about like your standard Rubbermaid Tough Totes. The reason they're shaped the way they are is so they release easily from the mold. Same sort of thing here. If they were perfectly straight, they wouldn't come out very well. So I'll just trim this down. One more. There we go. Not perfect. Again, my blade is starting to get raggedy, and so it doesn't want to play nice. So now we'll just drop that in there. You can hear, maybe, it's just in the corner. It's not adhering. And there's also some different shaped stuff happening there. So that's also accounting for why it's fitting the way it is, and why my original thought that I'd need more than just the foam is an issue, because this, I didn't think about it, but the fact that this is indented, and I don't remember exactly what portion of the box I measured into. So if your box lid is like this, you'll need to pay attention to that when you're measuring how deep you need to make your pieces. So the other thing I need to do now is I need to mark where my lines are. Now this is basically, I'm more concerned about where in the box they go than I am about this piece of foam actually. But I'm leaving it in there so I've got something to rest it on. So I just want to make sure, and I could eyeball it when the time comes, but I'm not always good about that. And it's just a good habit to get into, to mark things, measure twice, cut once, and all that jazz. Oops. Measure on that. There we go. So basically what I'm going to need is another 2 centimeter or so pieces. And those ones I'm not going to put a divot into. So let's just measure here. 2 and 4. And again, 2 and 4. They're not straight. That one's better. All right. These 2 cuts. There we go. So now, theoretically, if we put those pieces right there, our box is basically done. We can test it with a couple of brushes. Let's do it before we attach that, because if there is some depth issues, we can still address that. So let's throw some brushes in here and make sure that this sucker will still close. You may need to make those indentations wider depending on your brushes. I'm just going to put this on top. So it's a little bit tight, and that's okay. Ultimately, if I work on those brush divots, that will improve. Alternatively, I could shave just a little bit off of here. That would be another option. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's just take a little bit off the top. Now, the alternative would be to use a different foam that isn't quite as thick as this, but I'm not sure that anything else I have is gonna work. The floor mat I do have is a little bit less, but I'll be stacking up several layers there to get that depth. So I'm just trimming off some of that. I have no idea if this is actually going to work. It's not something I can say that I've done before. I'm going to call that a failed experiment. Yep. All right, so we can't shave that down. That's fine. What we'll do is we'll have to make these holes bigger. All right, that's not a big deal. And realistically, you only need to make the side where the brushes are thickest, which is right near the ferrule down here. That's the most important part. Now, alternatively, I could squeeze the brushes in this way, but they're relatively, and maybe it's just that I reposition that. If I reposition it, move it up here, that might just be a better option. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to take this piece and we're going to position it so it's further up. There we go. There we go. There. Now we can do 2 more 2cm strips. I could get away without drawing the lines and just cutting, but I always like, again, it's about having that knowledge of exactly what you're doing and only having to deal with cutting once. It's that drawing the line when you're doing something like this is that second measurement, right? I'm just trimming the ends because I don't think we need them. And I think they'll interfere a little bit when it closes if they're too tight to the edge. I think that was part of what was giving us the closure issues earlier. All right, so I'm going to tuck it up against this side, so that way there's lots of clearance here. I hate and love this pressure sensitive adhesive. It will behave at some point. I just don't think it was well designed necessarily for EVA foam. There's a part of me where I'm just like, you know what, I don't care that I've got the pressure sensitive adhesive and just use the carpet tape. Except I refuse to be beaten by an inanimate object. Come on. Come on. There we go. Against that edge. And now, same thing, just up against the other edge. Or at the other end. Come on. I haven't decided if I'm going to cut this bit out yet or if you guys actually have to listen to me fight with this stuff. I think it'd be funny if I just left it all in there. But I also don't want to make you watch. There we go. It doesn't have a perfect closure, but it never really did. So let's throw some brushes in there. And like I said, it may be something where in the long term I need to make deeper cuts, especially up here. But the goal is that if I'm taking my brushes somewhere, I feel relatively confident that they're going to get there, because I lose these plastic things. You'll notice I've got my brushes here. I've got a bunch of brushes, different sizes, different styles. Some of them never had. Like dry brushes from GW don't come with those now. And I'm pretty sure that the miniature gaming brushes that I also don't think I have any of them here. I think everything I've got in this particular stack is GW. Oh, this is an older GW brush. But there, I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 brushes in here, and it closes fine. And they are safe and well suspended. And you can't see them, but that's all right. So, took me about, I don't know, an hour. The video will probably be about 20 minutes. So you'll see how to make this particular brush case. Transport your brushes safely to and from wherever you need to go. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't enjoy it, I don't mind the thumbs down, but some comments on what you think I could improve. Obviously, maybe if I'd made one of these in advance as a demonstration, but I think for what it is and for 15 bucks, is a better case than you would have been able to buy from Amazon. All right, until next time, thank you very much for watching, and remember, always work your wonk and keep it geeky.